Hi everyone, David here from daviddumaiaudio.com, and in this video I want to talk to you about what it's like working with video game developers as a freelance sound designer. Now, I actually had this question come in from someone who had emailed me, and they basically asked exactly that. What is it like working with other game developers? What does the communication look like? What does the process look like? What are you in charge of? What are you not in charge of? What do you have to deliver, not deliver? A whole bunch of these questions, and that's exactly what I want to go over in this video. But before we actually jump in, if you haven't checked the description yet, make sure to check it out. If you are a sound designer and you want to learn how to create better sound effects, I put together a free little PDF called my 5 layering techniques PDF, and just go to sfx.daviddumaiaudio.com/layering. And in that PDF, I go over, exactly that, 5 different layering techniques that I use to create new and better sound effects. So make sure to check the link for that. All right, let's get into it. All right, so when I am first communicating with a potential client, whether it's a game developer or other, the first thing that I do is I just ask a lot of questions. I do my best to ask as many questions as possible so that we have absolute clarity on what the project is, what the expectations are, and everything around that. So a lot of these questions are going to be around, like, what is the video game? What's the budget? What's the project look like? How many sound effects do you need? And everything around that. So let's go over some of these. So I wrote some of these down. So for one, I write down, what kind of the expectations are in terms of deliverables. How many sound effects do they need from me? The style, the genre, the format that they want to deliver it in. Do they want it in WAV, in Ogg Vorbis? So what exactly are they expecting? What do they need? Sometimes I will ask for like an asset list. That might be something that I might suggest or require depending on the project. But usually if depending on the size or the scope of the project, that won't always be necessary. Other things to discuss is whether they need implementation or not. And if they do, is it going to be directly in the engine? Is it going to be within Wwise, Fmod, or other? Other things that we will talk about is like the timeline of the project. Is this a game that's going to be, out like next year or like a year from now? Is it a game that's coming out in like a month or two? Like, how tight is this deadline? And what is my deadline personally whenever I have to deliver the sound effects, right? Whenever I have to deliver all my work, when is that deadline? I need to know when that is so that not only do I want it to be a bit earlier, because let's say their deadline, if their project is being released, let's say in 2 months, just for argument's sake, and then their deadline for me is like a week before the delivery date. I mean, that would never actually happen. It's like way too close, but just for argument's sake. Well, normally what I try to do is I want the deadline to be actually a bit before that, because I want to have some back and forth with the developer so that there's room for changes if there needs to be, and there usually needs to be. So it's always good to have that extra kind of space, whether it's like a week or two or more, to have that back and forth and to see what needs to be changed or improved. So other things that will come up in conversation that I want to talk about is, of course, payment. Is it going to be a one-time payment? Is it going to be split up over multiple payments? How much is that payment going to be? So that's all things that we're going to talk about. Other things that come up in conversations, though I don't normally do this, but stuff like contracts, NDAs if we need to sign any kind of agreements. So normally the scope of work that I do, I don't usually use contracts just because I haven't really needed to. The larger the projects that you go into, then and depending on who you go into work with, you might need to do that. Like a lot of the people that I work with is usually small game developers, so the scope of work is usually pretty small. So in terms of what I actually deliver from my work, personally, what I've been doing is mostly just WAV files. So what I deliver to the client are just WAV files. So they're completed WAV files. They've been edited, everything. They're ready to go, and I just send that over to them, and that's usually it. Now, of course, that depends on the project, because some projects, if you're doing implementation, then that might look a bit different. But for me, most of my projects are usually pretty small, so I just deliver the audio files, and that's good. But again, it's going to depend. It's going to be different depending on the project that you take on and the agreements that you come up with. So yes, I always mix and master my own sound effects, but in terms of the final mix that you might hear in a game, for me personally, just with the developers that I've worked with, they have kind of done the own implementation themselves. So the mix that they put into the game is usually the final mix that you will hear. And by that, I mean that whenever they're putting sounds in the game, they have control over the volume and how loud certain sounds are. So if they don't like the loudness of a certain sound, they might actually lower or raise the volume, for that matter, depending on the context of that sound. So because I'm not doing the implementation directly for some of these projects, I don't know how they're going to relate to other sounds or how the developer wants them used with other sounds or based on different situations. So they are kind of in control of that final mix. But in terms of how each sound effects relates to each other, then yes, I am responsible, and I make sure that they are mixed and mastered in that way. So yes, for myself, I pretty much always ask for some sort of visuals to work with, because it's really hard to create sound effects without knowing exactly what you're designing for. So yes, I always ask for something, though I know it's not unheard of that you might start a project, especially like if it's only going to be released in a year or two or three, if you're brought in really early, that you might start without any kind of visuals or anything, and you might just kind of work blind. But in general, yes, I always ask for something because whenever I jump into a project, normally developers are like at least halfway through or near the end. And so they always have something to give so that I know exactly what I'm designing for. So basically all audio except music. So as a sound designer, you are basically in charge of and responsible for any audio that the game will play. So this is everything from ambiances, Foley. It could even be dialogue, though normally because I'm working with smaller developers, dialogue, they'll kind of take care of their own, of hiring that side of things. But it's not unheard of that you might be in charge of that if you are the sound designer, that you might be asked to hire other people. So kind of depends. As a freelance, working with smaller developers and stuff, you kind of anything goes. So it's really all based around what your agreement is with them. So that's why at the beginning, it's always really important to just ask a lot of questions, set up expectations in advance so that both sides know exactly what to expect and what's going to happen. All right, so that's pretty much it for this video. Those are the questions I had. If you have more questions, though, I'd be interested to know what they are. Maybe I'll make a part 2 of this video. If you leave them down in the comments below, I can compile them together, maybe make another video about it. But that's it for now. I hope you found it useful and valuable. And for all these questions and just working with developers, it's kind of, for me personally, in my experience, it's kind of been a very casual experience because I don't go and work like in a studio or anything like that. And usually it's like I'm working with a solo developer. So it's just, we kind of build up a friendship, talk to them, and then we kind of go on agreements like that. That's just how I've done it. Personally, I know a lot of people have various different ways of doing it. So don't take just my word for it. There's other ways of doing it, other ways that people like to work with developers. I know that contracts is one of those things where a lot of people will say, well, you should probably have that in place, even if you never actually have to end up using it or like going back to it or something. If anything, it makes you look more professional and stuff like that, which is, it's true. There's a good point to that. But personally, I've never actually used them yet. I have signed some NDAs and stuff like that, but not so much for contracts. But anyways, so take what I say with a grain of salt. That's just been my experience. So hopefully that kind of lights up a little bit about what it's like working with game developers, what the communication kind of looks like, what kind of questions you might ask. And basically my framework behind it is that I always try to think about, as I'm going into working with a client, like I like to think about, okay, let's say they approach me, they say, hey, we want to work with you for a video game to do sounds. And I said, okay, let's get into it. So as soon as I say that, let's say they were going to pay me and now I have to deliver. Well, what do I need to know before I can actually do anything, right? So this is when you start to ask all the questions. So you're kind of playing this hypothetical situation where they're like, here you go, here's the money, go and make the sounds. Well, then you're like, oh wait, what? Well, I don't know what kind of sounds I need. So this is where all my questions come from. It's like, okay, well, what kind of sounds do I need to get? How many? Are you going to send me videos? What's the timeline? Like, this is where I come up with all these questions to be able to communicate with them. And then once again, just like as many questions as you can ask, not only will it show your interest in the project, in the person, but it also just helps clarify what the expectations are, so that there's no miscommunication or just like bad experience that happens as the project goes along. So anyways, that's pretty much it. Thanks so much for watching. If you've made it all the way through to the end, just a reminder to grab that free PDF, that layering PDF in the description below. And yeah, that's it for now. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.